Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different. It's almost like whiplash, really. We are diving into two moments happening at the exact same time and treating them like they're live events unfolding right in front of us.
Exactly. And they could not be more different. On one hand, you have this sweaty, just bone-deep exhaustion in an elite high school locker room.
And then at the same moment, we're on a high desert shelf overlooking a city where there's this philosophical cage match going on.
Right, a cage match is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to really get inside these pressures as they're happening. We're looking at the pure physical grind that shapes these young athletes at the Enfield Tennis Academy.
A world of sweat, barbicide, and some really complex internal stuff.
And at the same time, we're dissecting this incredibly tense intellectual debate between two, let's call them geopolitical operatives. And they're trying to define the very nature of love, of sacrifice, and really what starts wars.
So we're going to be moving from these tiny, almost microscopic details, like a single strained ankle or a weird physical compulsion, all the way out to this huge panoramic view of ideology and history. We're going to weave back and forth between just the stifling steam of that ETA locker room.
And then out into the cold, clean, violet air of the desert at twilight. It's all about seeing how, profound physical suffering shapes one conversation.
And how this absolute chosen ideological commitment drives the other one. It's a huge contrast.
It is, and it's almost like a study in two different vocabularies of pain. The ETA boys, they're literally struggling to find the words, the syntax, as they put it, to even describe how tired they are.
Yeah, their basic biological need for just rest.
Exactly. And meanwhile, Marathi and Steeply, they're trying to build this grand philosophical framework for what a person should be willing to die for.
It really brings up that question, doesn't it? Is the suffering you don't choose, the involuntary stuff, is it any less meaningful than the sacrifice you consciously decide to make?
That's the core of it.
Okay, so let's start right there. Let's drop into the immediate, visceral reality of that ETA locker room. It's a Tuesday. It's 1,640 hours, 4:40 in the afternoon. And just reading the daily schedule, you feel this ache in your bones.
So the schedule is just, it's less a guide and more like a weapon. Think about it. You've got AM drills, then classes, labs, you eat, then a prescriptive grammar exam.
Right in the middle of the day.
Right. More labs, a conditioning run, PM drills, and this is the killer, 2 full challenge matches.
So that's full-on competitive intensity, twice.
And then you do punishing upper body circuits, and then a sauna. It's only after all of that that you finally get to just slump onto the floor.
And what we're seeing is the direct result of that relentless structure. The upperclassmen are finally in the locker room. They're out of the shower, but you can see the fatigue has just stunned them. They're almost catatonic.
Yeah, they're clean on the outside. Their hair is wet-combed. It's shining with barbicide, but, internally they're just demolished.
And the details of their appearance, they're kind of important, aren't they? They're markers of the discipline.
They really are. You see Pemulus meticulously working on his hair, trying to get that specific wide-furrowed Alston look that the older guys have. He's using the big end of his comb.
And Hal, who is just naturally precise about everything, he looks like that all the time. But this outer layer of polish and structure, it just makes the chaos of what's happening inside their bodies even more stark.
Absolutely. And the atmosphere itself is defined by sound and heat. You've got steam hanging so heavy in the air you could probably swim in it. The shower heads are just dribbling.
No pressure left.
None.
Yeah.
And then you have these distant, ghastly, but somehow familiar sounds echoing from one of the stalls. It's T-shocked. It's this constant backdrop of institutional cleanliness trying to fight back against immediate human distress.
That tension, that quiet is then just shattered by this moment of, it's just profound vulgarity. And it's also a release.
It really is. The silence lasts for maybe 10 seconds, and it's just too much for Pemulus. He does this deep, guttural throat clearing, a sound of just total internal depletion.
And then he sends this huge, impressive, and just utterly disgusting loogie up and over into the sink.
Hal catches the quiver of it in the mirror. And you're right, it's totally gross. It's not elite behavior at all.
No.
But it's so important. It signals this collapse of all inhibition that's born from just being completely, utterly exhausted. They're so depleted that the normal rules of being civilized just don't apply anymore.
They're just bodies at this point, reduced to their physical, visceral selves.
And that primal act punctuates this first failed attempt at having an intellectual conversation. So he tries to start a dialogue about the exam they just took.
Right. They ask if anyone is able to even realize what they're sitting there feeling is unhappiness. They're trying to connect their own physical misery to these high-minded ideas from the tests.
They're reaching for meaning.
And how the one character who just embodies precision, he snaps that connection shut immediately. Even in his state of near collapse, he clarifies, very quietly, very precisely, that the exam wasn't about the real unhappiness of families. It wasn't about feeling. It was about the syntax of Tolstoy's sentence.
And that is such a crucial move on his part. It's an intellectual distinction, for sure, but it's also a defense mechanism, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The others are trying to find some grand literary tragedy in their own suffering, and Hal just brings them right back down to the technical, the structural, the purely academic.
If they just focus on syntax, they don't have to deal with the much messier, much scarier truth of their own real unhappiness, or just how physically broken they feel. His precision is like a fortress he builds around himself.
But that silence is still too uncomfortable, so Trolls tries to divert everyone with a pop quiz.
Another technical deep dive. This time into entertainment history based on lectures from this guy Leith, who they call the Diz.
They're trying so hard to switch from the emotional brain to the structured, technical brain. Anything to avoid the existential dread of their own fatigue.
And the quiz is surprisingly detailed. They're getting into the fundamental differences between old-school broadcast TV analog and the modern cartridge-capable TP.
The core of it, the main technical difference they're debating, is the cathode-luminescent panel.
Right. So the modern TV, it doesn't have the old cathode gun or the phosphenic screen. Those were the engines of the old tech. This isn't just a small upgrade, it's a complete paradigm shift from analog to digital.
And the real consequence of that shift, the thing they're really interested in, is the absence of artifacts, the technical purity of it.
You mean like snow on the screen?
Exactly. The old analog world had snow, it had those faint, ghostly double images, the vertical roll when a plane flew over. The new technology is just pure. High resolution, and most importantly, it's uncontaminated.
Which is such a direct parallel to what they're trying to do themselves as athletes.
It's a perfect parallel. They're trying to strip away the artifacts of human error, of distraction, of weakness, to achieve this perfect high-resolution performance. They want an artifact-free life.
And they even connect it back to their grammar class, talking about Leith's favorite word, seminal.
Oh yeah, they say he uses it about 11 times an hour, emphasizing how profound this digital shift is. And Pemulis points out that the Diz wants an argument, not just an obvious answer.
You have to justify why the high-def viewer or the right-capable CD is the most seminal advance. It's all about defending your position as the ultimate foundational element.
And speaking of foundational elements, the conversation suddenly turns right back to Hal. Trolls just throws out this seemingly random technical term, define acutance.
And Hal, who can barely breathe, he just delivers this precise, technical, almost clinical definition without any effort at all.
A measure of resolution directly proportional to the resolved ratio of a given pulse's digital code. It's instantaneous, it's flawless, and it feels completely disconnected from his physical state.
That dense definition, just for anyone listening, it basically means the clearer the digital signal, the better the picture. It's a technical measurement of the purity they're all chasing.
Right. The quality of the digital truth. And because Hal can access that definition, that purity, so effortlessly, it immediately brings on the teasing.
The nicknames start flying. The Inkster, Halorama, and then Halation.
Which they define as the halo-shaped pattern around light sources, that most angelic of distortions. It's this kind of half-nasty mockery, but it really shows you their complex relationship with his genius.
They're in awe of it. On one level, they suggest he can mentally scan a page, rotate it, fold the corner down in his mind.
And at the same time, they deeply resent it because his effortless intelligence makes their own intense, hard-won knowledge feel slow and clumsy.
Yeah.
His genius creates this gap that even they can't bridge in this place that's supposed to be full of geniuses.
And Hal's reaction, his internal reaction, it tells you everything you need to know. He's just placid, quiescent, his chin is on his chest.
He's not thinking about the teasing.
Not at all. His primary thought is that it just feels nice, finally, to breathe and get enough air. His supreme intellect is a lightning rod for all this social stuff, but his most immediate primary need is just biological. Air. Rest. The body is overriding the mind.
Every time.
Okay, so if the ETA boys are struggling to find a syntax for their own exhaustion, let's now shift violently to the high desert. Here, Steeply and Marathi are dealing with the semantics of global suffering. We're going from stifling institutional heat to the extreme cold of the open desert.
And the environment is a perfect inverse of the locker room. The sun is gone, the temperature is dropping fast, and this cooler evening wind is starting to move across the landscape.
They're on a shelf overlooking the distant, sprawling, complex twinkle of Tucson.
And instead of the chaos of human distress, the dribbling showers, the sounds from the stall, here there are only these slight, dry rustlings of small things coming out at night. It's vast, it's still, and it's almost chillingly empty.
The postures of the two men reflect that stillness, too. Steeply, the American, is standing at a slight angle, just slackly transfixed by the view. He's staring out into the distance, almost emotionally detached.
But Marathi is grounded. He's seated on his stumps, listening. He's a little drowsy, but you get the sense he is acutely attuned to every little thing his companion does.
And despite this grand philosophical setting, the tension is immediate and it's personal. When Steeply baits him, Marathi's internal thought is just filled with contempt.
It's so visceral. Take off your wig and be shitting inside a Hugh Steeply BS head. I mean, even when they're discussing the fate of nations, the insults are raw and they're primal.
Steeply is the one who kicks off the philosophical debate. He frames Rodtine's love for your Luria person as this grand, timeless tragedy. He starts pulling out all the classical sweeping examples.
Right. Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot, Helen, Dante, and Beatrice. He's painting this romantic, elevated picture of sacrifice for love.
And Marathi just immediately dismantles that romanticism. He counters with his own list of examples, but his are much darker, much more self-imprisoned.
Yeah, Narcissus and Echo, Kierkegaard and Regina, Kafka and the Male Girl. These aren't grand romances that launch ships. These are obsessive, self-destructive, and ultimately unfulfilled or just damaging attachments.
So right away, you have this fundamental break. Steeply sees this kind of love as expansive, tragic, worthy of song.
And Marathi sees it as a potentially narcissistic, crippling prison that just bends back in on the self. It's the romantic versus the realist.
Marathi then uses history to just absolutely destroy Steeply's romantic premise. Steeply uses that classic simple story of the Trojan War. Paris and Helen, the face that launched vessels of war.
And Marathi calls that knowledge appallingly naive. He starts by correcting a secondary fact that it was Menelaus of Sparta who was Helen's husband, not Agamemnon. A little detail.
But then he gets to the main point. The key correction is about the real reason for the war. He says Paris and Helen were just the excuse, the cover story that Steeply is falling for.
The real reason, according to Marathi, was pure, cold, transactional commerce. Troy controlled the Dardanelles, that narrow strip of water, and was charging ruinous tolls for any Greek trade with the East.
So the Greeks went to war for economic reasons, to secure their trade routes and their wealth.
And this is Marathi's central thesis, delivered with this chilling calm. What launches vessels of war is the state and community and its interests. He just completely dismisses the romantic idea that the love for one woman could mobilize an entire coalition of states.
The real temple, the thing you worship and go to war for, is the state's self-interest, the economy.
It immediately cheapens Steeply's entire argument. It grounds the whole grand narrative in pure transactional self-interest. It shifts the debate from tragic love to cost-benefit analysis.
Steeply, and this is probably a tactical move, he pivots back to the personal, back to Rodtine. He insists that Tyne's willingness to die twice for Luria elevates the situation, that it transcends the political.
He's arguing that this is what makes the American president gentle, actually receptive to Tyne's whole situation, this personal tragic element.
But Maratha, and you have to remember, he has his own painful history of betraying his cause, the AFR, for his wife's medical care. He quietly refutes Tyne's choice.
He dismisses it as non-responsible. He even compares it to the actions of the insane. His point is that if the devotion is so absolute that it requires no rational thought, no internal conflict, then it stops being a responsible, conscious choice that's worthy of being called tragic.
So he's implying that this absolute passion, the kind that drives Tyne, or even the kind that drove Maratha's own actions for his wife, is actually a form of weakness, not strength.
It is. And then he delivers this brutally personal attack on Steeply. These sentiments from a person who allows them to place him in the field as an enormous girl with tits at the cockeyed angle, now discoursing on tragic love.
That is a low blow. It's aimed right at Steeply's physical disguise and his compromised position as an agent. It highlights how ridiculous, how much theater is involved in their whole exchange.
But Steepley just stays impassive. He picks at his lip. He's absorbing the insult while still trying to push the intellectual battle forward.
So let's jump back into that dense, steamy locker room. We're moving away from the ideological theater and back to the physical evidence of all this suffering. The players are just slumped on the blue carpet, their backs against the steel lockers.
And they're deliberately avoiding the little anti-mildew vents. It's a small detail, but it shows you they're seeking any kind of comfort they can find.
The most striking detail here, for me, is the piebald coloring of their bodies. It's like a visual map of their labor.
It really is. Their arms and legs, the parts exposed on the court, are this deep sienna tan, but their feet and ankles are toad-belly white, the white of the grave.
And their chests are off-white, showing where the sun exposure just stops. Their faces are red, shiny, peeling.
It's this profound demonstration of their institutionalized life. They exist in these very defined zones of sun and shade, and it produces a body that is completely unnatural, a body designed for one thing: relentless output.
And this leads us to this bizarre little piece of their culture surrounding Lemon Pledge.
Right. So we learned that using actual sunscreen is considered unconscionably pussified by some of these boys. It's a sign of weakness, a failure to just accept the grind. But they still need protection from the sun.
So what do? They adopt Lemon Pledge. Furniture polish.
And it turns out that if you let it dry to a thin crust, this stuff is a phenomenal UV 40+ sunscreen, and it can survive the punishing sweat of a 3-set match.
This is such a key insight into their mindset. They reject a conventional, sensible form of protection as weak.
But they embrace a flammable furniture polish substitute as this bizarre shared badge of honor.
It's a perfect illustration of their toxic performance culture, isn't it? They're inflicting pain, they're accepting these unnatural conditions. The smell of sweat-wet pledge is making some kids physically sick.
And it's all to signal their status as elite athletes who refuse to be pussified by normal means. This self-inflicted hardship. It's their chosen temple right there on their skin.
And inside this environment of structured suffering, we start to see the social dynamics, specifically this big buddy system that Charles Cave has set up.
It's designed to provide some comfort. The older boys act as a wing for the younger kids. We see them waiting. Peter Beek, who's 12, Evan Ingersoll is 11, Kent Blott is 10, and Idris Arslanian, 14, is kind of lurking shyly outside.
Hal is a big buddy, which is a sign of administrative trust in him. He's basically a resident advisor and a parector liaison all rolled into one.
And the idea is that the older boys are supposed to be a confidential shoulder to lean on, bridging that gap between the administration and these often homesick, struggling younger students.
Hal has his own specific route, and we find out he got Evan Ingersoll through an off-the-books trade with another student, Trevor Axford. And the reason for the trade is, well, it's pretty disturbing.
It really is. It tells you so much about the psychological pressure cookers these kids are in. Axford despised Ingersoll with a horrible compulsion.
Not just dislike.
No, it was a psychological urge to inflict physical harm. Specifically, he had this recurring thought of putting the kid's fingers in a door hinge and just slowly closing it.
And Axford was apparently struggling against this compulsion almost to the point of tears. It shows you the severe internalized stress and the potential for real cruelty that's baked into this high-stakes environment.
And Hal, even though he likes being a mentor, he finds himself struggling with a strange urge to be cruel to Ingersoll, too. He can't even place why, just that the boy reminds him of someone he dislikes.
So even the designated comforters, the good guys, are battling these dark, compulsive, non-chosen feelings that are brought out by all the stress.
And this is the deep paradox of the big buddy system. The older player is supposed to be a confidential shoulder, but to maintain respect and command, he has to actively maintain these unbridgeable gaps of experience and ability.
If you get too close, too friendly, you lose your authority.
Exactly. So Hal enjoys the good side of it. He likes giving these little unpretentious lectures on tennis theory and discovering his own beliefs as he says them out loud. He likes being kind when it doesn't cost him anything.
But the role is ethically impossible, because he's also required to inform the parectors, Tony Nongi and Tex Watson, about the psychic states of the little kids. Homesickness, potential for collapse.
He's flagging potential attritive defections for the administration. He's a spy.
He has to be both a true friend and an administrative spy. He's walking this moral tightrope where if he falls one way, it's an institutional reprimand, and if he falls the other, it could be the psychological breakdown of a child he's supposed to be protecting.
So back with the upperclassmen, the conversation turns again to the failure of language. Tired just doesn't do it.
They're talking about word inflation and inflation-generative grammar. They're trying to find words to articulate the sheer depth of their fatigue, but language is failing them.
They throw out all the synonyms, exhausted, shot, depleted, totaled, cached, but they decide they need a whole new syntax for fatigue.
Stice even comes up with a new word, hyperbolicer, linking this need for exaggerated language to things like great inflation, the constant escalation that's required just to express a basic reality.
And this whole problem, this linguistic failure, is then sarcastically aimed right at Hal, the master of precision. Need a whole new syntax for fatigue on days like this? How?
The genius is being asked to solve the ultimate human problem.
And his response is perfect. It's wordless, it's physical, and it is highly vulgar. He does that common gesture of holding one fist up and cranking it with the other hand.
The universal sign for this is impossible or suck it up.
And they all agree. This vulgar, nonverbal act speaks volumes. It proves that when structured language completely fails, the body finds its own perfect, crude syntax.
This profound exhaustion, both physical and linguistic, it just gives way to this collective daydream, a litany of desires for escape.
They fantasize about getting their mind in neutral, just watching something uncomplex like chase scenes and stuff blowing up, anything that requires zero mental processing.
The desires then escalate pretty quickly into just immediate hedonistic release. Bongs, looking at lingerie catalogs, the very specific comfort of eating granola with a great big wooden spoon.
And then just constant, crude, explicit references to sex. Get laid, bump uglies, haul ashes. They are just yearning for a total shutdown of the institutional control over their bodies and minds.
But the fantasy that really locks you into how desperate they are is the hyper-specific one.
Oh, yeah.
The longing for Northeast Oklahoma drive-in burger stand waitresses with the great big huge titties. And they're described as enormous pink-white French painting tits that sort of like tumble out.
That level of intense, geographically specific, completely non-elite escapism, it tells you just how truly miserable they are. They're desperately craving a life that is as far away as possible from the cold, analytical world of the academy.
And then the atmosphere darkens. It turns to a really serious critique. Stice brings up a long-term medical concern. He questions the short-sightedness of the schedule.
5 hours of vigorous, nonstop, straight-out motion. He argues that stressing the pubertyizing skeleton like this is inevitably going to make them injury-prone by the time they're 20.
Right, when they're supposed to be hitting their professional peak.
It's the core transactional question. Is the relentless pursuit of short-term elite status worth sacrificing the long-term health of your body? And the blame shifts. First to Charles Tavis for the excess work, and then to Stitt, the coach they all respect.
And Freer, who is one of the Lemon Pledge sunscreen guys, he throws out this inflammatory comment that Stitt is a good Nazi.
And that causes this immediate emotional inversion in the room. Despite all the pain Stitt puts them through, that accusation provokes a really sharp reaction, especially from Stice, who instantly seems to regret that insult to his mentor.
But the real quiet suffering is still happening in the background. Hal is thinking about T-Shock, still silently locked away in that stall, battling Crohn's disease and arthritic gout. These are chronic, debilitating, hidden conditions. Hal can only see the tip of Shock's enormous purple shower thongs under the stall door.
And Hal's observation here is, it's really profoundly moving. He looks at Shock's feet, just inert, and he sees something humble, placid, and deeply accepting in them.
He sees the defecatory posture, that bent, waiting position, as an accepting posture. He calls it timeless and millennial, almost religious.
He mentally connects Shock's silent, chronic suffering to figures throughout history. Martin Luther's shoes, generations of salesmen, centurions, popes, all of them waiting, heads down, just accepting their physical limits.
Shock's internal, constant medical battle, which is invisible to everyone unless they hear those ghastly sounds, it's the perfect counterpoint to the collective, visible exhaustion of the other players.
It's that essential, universal human suffering that you can't train away. You can't improve it with technical skill. It's just quiet acceptance of mortality and a physical flaw.
The whole scene in the locker room climaxes as Hal finally struggles to stand up, and it's this carefully choreographed move. He has to deliberately put the majority of his weight on his good ankle.
And this one small, calculated act of self-preservation, it reveals the secret. The blue tinge and the faint swelling on his left ankle. A physical flaw that the genius has been quietly nursing this whole time.
And then his vulnerability is just completely exposed when his towel falls off as he's making this effort.
And the wave of half-cruel, half-sympathetic laughter that follows is immediately and completely swallowed by the deafening industrial roar of a high-pressure toilet flushing.
Individual pain, vulnerability, the collective human reaction to it,
Yeah.
it's all just instantly erased by the impersonal noise of the institution.
So we jump from that institutional noise back to the vast, cool quiet of the desert shelf. Marathi is now giving Steeply an etymology lesson.
Right. He links Steeply's use of the word fanatic back to the Latin word for temple.
And Marathi insists that this term should be universal. Steeply uses fanatic as a dismissive political jab, but Marathi says our attachments are our temple. What we worship, no. What we give ourselves to, what we invest with faith.
He's arguing that every single deep commitment is an act of worship. It's a form of fanaticism.
And this sets up his brutal critique of individual love. If love is a temple, he argues, then it has to be chosen very carefully. Dying for one person, he says, is craziness, because people are fundamentally unstable.
He lays out the risk assessment of loving a person.
He does. Persons change, leave, die, become ill. They leave, lie, go mad, have sickness, betray you, die. Therefore, committing your entire being to a single unstable person is just logically and ideologically flawed.
So his solution is to choose something stable, something greater than the self, a nation, a cause, a community, something that enlarges the heart.
Whereas sexual love, he argues, it bends back in on the self, makes you narrow, maybe crazy. It's a self-serving temple.
Steeply challenges this whole idea of a sober, rational choice. He brings up the involuntary nature of passion.
He asks, what if the temple comes to Muhammad? What if you just love without deciding? He's suggesting that some passions are just unavoidable, maybe even biological. It's a feeling those ETA boys would understand intimately.
Marathi's disdain for this idea is just palpable. He says if the attachment is involuntary, then the temple is just self and sentiment.
The person is reduced to a fanatic of desire, a slave to your individual subjective narrow self-sentiments, a citizen of nothing.
And that is the ultimate Marathian insult, to be a citizen of nothing. It means you lack any foundational commitment outside of your own feelings.
He concludes that this kind of non-chosen love is pathetic bondage, not tragic, no songs. The person thinks they would die for another, but in truth, they would only die for their own subjective feeling of attachment.
And the ultimate consequence of this non-choice is instability. You fall, you blow here and there, tragically, involuntarily lost.
It's such a sharp contrast to the institutional stability and collective identity that the ETA boys are striving for, even through all their pain.
And this is where the debate gets painfully personal. Maratha brings up Steeply's recent divorce, the fact that his car is subsidized by an aspirin ad.
He's highlighting the transactional, compromised nature of Steeply's own attachments in his professional life. And then he presses him directly. You, M. Hugh Steeply. You would die without thinking for what?
And Steeply, the man who manages all this high-stakes information and uses silence as a tactic, he offers no response. He just stares into the darkness.
And that silence could be tactical. Or it could be a profound admission that he is, in fact, a citizen of nothing, that he has no stable temple to sacrifice himself for.
The scene closes with this final kind of bizarre contrast. Marathe tries to sing the U.S. national anthem, "Oh, say land of the free," but he sings it badly. He's all over the map, key-wise.
It's this discordant note on national devotion. And despite this huge ideological gulf between them, the two men are just sitting there in the descending desert chill, and they're only staying warm inside the form-fitting astral spacesuit of warmth their own radiant heat produced.
This brief, personal biological sanctuary against the cold reality of their political and philosophical differences.
It's an amazing image.
So when we put these two worlds right next to each other, you see two versions of fanaticism, right? Two different kinds of temple. The ETA players are suffering profoundly, physically, for the institutional temple of elite status, for the collective goal of professional greatness.
It's a commitment to that artifact-free performance we were talking about.
And yet, their suffering is so immediate, so physical. The swollen ankle, the desperate need for air, the primal loogie, the sexual fantasies, it constantly challenges Marathi's rigid philosophy of conscious choice.
It really does. I mean, Hal, with his genius brain, he cannot choose not to feel the pain in his ankle. He can't choose not to feel the lack of air in his lungs.
And if Marathi is right that our attachments must be chosen carefully to avoid pathetic bondage, then how do we classify something like Axford's compulsive, involuntary cruelty, or that simple, overwhelming need for crude release they all feel?
Those are biological demands. They're involuntary reactions that just completely supersede any kind of sober account-keeping choice.
The most compelling insight for me is that contrast between Shock's hidden suffering and the very visible suffering of the other boys. Shocked, battling his invisible chronic diseases, he embodies that accepting posture, the quiet, timeless tragedy of physical limitation.
While the other boys, by pursuing elite status, are actively trying to transcend those limitations, they're trying to choose a temple of physical invincibility.
They're striving for the physical purity that mirrors the digital purity from the pop quiz. But the second struggles to stand, flexing a swollen ankle. That physical flaw, that artifact is revealed. The body always betrays the choice in the end.
Which brings us to a powerful final question, I think. If you were defined only by what you would die for without thinking twice, what does the simple, overwhelming, non-negotiable need for air and rest, the need we see in the ETA players, what does that reveal about their true commitment?
This is relentless pursuit of achievement. All the structure, the pain, the exhaustion. Is it a carefully chosen temple of devotion?
Or is it, for most of them, just the default setting for their bondage? A non-choice which Murthy would instantly dismiss as sentimental self-worship, even if it's all wrapped up in the flag of elite performance.
We'll leave you to chew on that one. The ultimate cost of commitment, whether it's chosen or not. Thank you for diving deep with us today.